Antarctica is a wholly unique place politically. No one owns the continent. It's not divided up between nations. It's governed by an international treaty. But with the world increasingly divisive, can Antarctica stay?
Antarctica isn't just a giant empty block of ice floating at the bottom of the world. It's a massive vault, hiding planet-shaking secrets. For decades, scientists scrambled to figure out what was really happening beneath the surface, staring at anomalies that made zero sense. Now, the vault is finally cracking open. What researchers just pulled out of the freezing depths solves the continent's absolute biggest mystery. And trust me, the answer is equal parts mind-blowing and genuinely terrifying. First, the continent was tropical. Imagine standing at the South Pole, pulling off your heavy parka and feeling a balmy, ocean-scented breeze brush against your face. You look around, but instead of a blinding desert of flat white ice stretching to the horizon, you are surrounded by a towering, dense canopy of lush green trees. Swampy ferns crowd the forest floor. Rivers wind through mossy valleys, and the humid air smells like rich, damp soil after a heavy rainstorm. It sounds like pure science fiction, but this isn't a hypothetical fantasy world. This was the literal reality of Antarctica. For a long time, the biggest question mark hovering over the bottom of the world was deceptively simple. Has Antarctica always been an isolated, frozen wasteland? Or was it once a living, breathing part of the active biosphere? We knew the climate had shifted over millions of years, but nobody quite grasped how radical that transformation truly was. The idea that the coldest, most hostile environment on Earth, a place where temperatures routinely drop below -100 degrees Fahrenheit, could have ever supported a thriving rainforest felt almost impossible to reconcile. Then, scientists decided to stop guessing and start digging. Using massive, heavy-duty ice drilling rigs mounted on specialized research vessels, an international team of geologists drilled straight into the seafloor of West Antarctica, near the Pine Island Glacier. They punched through layers of ocean sediment, cutting hundreds of feet down into the bedrock to pull up ancient core samples. What they extracted from the dark depths of the ocean floor shocked even the researchers who had spent their entire lives studying ancient climate patterns. They didn't just find lifeless rock or cold gravel. Buried beneath hundreds of meters of marine sediment and ice, they uncovered perfectly preserved, dark forest soil. When scientists sliced open these drill cores and put them under high-powered electron microscopes, they found an intact, highly complex ecosystem frozen in time from roughly 90 million years ago, during the mid-Cretaceous period. The soil was densely packed with fossilized plant roots, so well preserved that researchers could still trace the delicate, individual cellular networks of the vegetation. They discovered fossilized pollen grains, delicate spores from ancient ferns, and traces of broadleaf trees that had flourished right near the South Pole. This wasn't just a handful of tough, tundra-style mosses clinging to life on a rocky coast. This was a full-blown, dense, temperate swamp forest, an environment remarkably similar to the lush, rain-drenched forests you would find in modern-day New Zealand or the Pacific Northwest. The data revealed that during the Cretaceous period, average annual temperatures in West Antarctica hovered around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. During the peak of summer, temperatures soared well into the 60s and 70s. Swampy lakes dotted the landscape. River networks carved through forested valleys, and the continent was buzzing with life. Now, pause for a second and process how insane that actually is. Antarctica sits right on the bottom axis of our planet. 90 million years ago, it was located at nearly the exact same extreme polar latitude it occupies today. That means this ancient rainforest endured the exact same brutal solar schedule that modern Antarctica experiences. 4 solid months of complete, unbroken polar night darkness every single winter. Think about what that requires. A dense, thriving forest managed to survive 4 months of pitch-black darkness without a single ray of sunlight to power photosynthesis, all while keeping temperatures well above freezing. To make that happen, the entire global climate engine had to be operating on absolute overdrive. Scientists ran the numbers and realized that for Antarctica to maintain a warm rainforest under total darkness, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels during the Cretaceous had to be astronomical, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million. That is over 4 times higher than the atmospheric CO2 levels we have today. The planet was so wrapped in a dense blanket of greenhouse gases that heat was trapped and distributed evenly across the globe, preventing the poles from ever freezing over. It solves the mystery of what Antarctica used to be, but it leaves us with an unsettling realization. Our planet's climate is capable of swinging to extremes that completely reshape the surface of continents. So, how does a sun-soaked paradise transform into the coldest place on Earth? Deep freeze engine. If you leave a tropical rainforest untouched for millions of years, it does not just quietly vanish into thin air without a massive, planet-shaking catalyst. Something colossal had to shatter Earth's climate equilibrium to turn a paradise of warm rivers, lush moss, and broadleaf canopies into a solid, miles-thick sheet of continuous ice. For generations, scientists were locked in a fierce debate over what exact mechanism flipped the switch, turning Antarctica into an icy tomb. Now, that foundational mystery is officially solved, and the answer reveals just how fragile the balance of our global ocean truly is. The turning point occurred roughly 34 million years ago, right at the boundary between the Eocene and Oligocene epochs. Up until that moment, Antarctica wasn't isolated at the bottom of the world. It was still physically glued to South America and Australia, as part of the lingering remnants of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana. Because the land masses were connected, warm ocean currents from the equator could easily flow straight down to the South Pole, bathing the Antarctic coastlines in a steady supply of tropical heat. The continent stayed green because the global ocean circulatory system kept pumping warmth directly into its veins. Then, tectonic plates began to move, and the Earth literally tore itself apart. As Australia drifted north and South America pulled away, a narrow, treacherous ocean passage cracked open at the tip of Cape Horn. This opened up what we now know as the Drake Passage. The moment that ocean gateway cleared, it unlocked the ultimate missing piece of the Antarctic puzzle, the birth of the Antarctic circumpolar current. Scientists used high-resolution ocean floor mapping and chemical isotope analysis of ancient marine sediments to prove that the opening of the Drake Passage triggered a runaway global freeze. Once the water had a clear path to flow continuously around the continent from west to east, it created the most powerful, aggressive ocean current on Earth. Driven by relentless polar winds, this swirling vortex of water effectively wrapped Antarctica in a permanent hydrodynamic straitjacket. The Antarctic circumpolar current acted as an impenetrable thermal barrier. It completely cut off the warm tropical ocean waters from ever reaching the polar shores again. Trapped inside this swirling wall of freezing water, Antarctica was left completely isolated in the dark. Without heat arriving from the equator, the continent began to cool down at a terrifyingly rapid pace. At the exact same time, another massive shift was occurring in the atmosphere. Global carbon dioxide levels, which had been elevated for tens of millions of years, suddenly plummeted below a critical tipping point of roughly 700 parts per million. With less greenhouse gas to trap heat, and a powerful ocean current blocking warm water from arriving, the atmosphere over the South Pole collapsed into an inescapable deep freeze. Snow began to fall across the mountains of West Antarctica. Because the summers were no longer warm enough to melt the winter buildup, the snow accumulated year after year, compacting under its own enormous weight into heavy, dense glacial ice. As the ice sheets expanded, they triggered a deadly feedback loop known as the albedo effect. Bright white ice reflects up to 90% of incoming sunlight back out into space, while dark green forest leaves absorb heat. The more ice that formed, the colder the continent became, accelerating the deep freeze across millions of square miles. Within a shockingly brief geological window, potentially in less than a few 100,000 years, a green, thriving continent was utterly obliterated beneath a crawling wall of ice over 2 miles thick. The rainforests were crushed, The rivers were frozen solid, and the entire ecosystem was sealed away beneath a desolate polar desert. Solving this mystery delivered a profound shock to paleoclimatologists. It proved that Earth does not always change slowly over time. When ocean gateways open and atmospheric thresholds are crossed, an entire continent can freeze solid in a geological blind turn. Once the ice locked the continent down, it began burying strange secrets, some of which eventually bled out onto the surface. The glacier that bleeds. Even after scientists mapped the tectonic drift and atmospheric drops that froze Antarctica solid, the continent kept serving up bizarre anomalies that defied basic chemistry. In 1911, during the ill-fated Terra Nova expedition, Australian geologist Griffith Taylor trudged up a massive glacier in the McMurdo Dry Valleys and froze in his tracks. Spilling out from the base of the ice sheet was a ghastly 5-story waterfall of vivid crimson liquid. It looked like a fresh, open wound, gushing bright blood across the stark white glacier, staining the ice and pouring straight into a frozen lake below. For over a century, this terrifying anomaly, aptly named Blood Falls, stood as one of Antarctica's most notorious unsolved mysteries. Early 20th century explorers immediately assumed the gory spectacle was caused by some kind of microscopic red algae blooming inside the ice. It was a reasonable guess for 1911, but as microbiology advanced, that theory completely fell apart. Samples taken from the red liquid contained zero living algae or plant pigments. For decades, researchers remained completely baffled by how a glacier could bleed a continuous stream of dark red water in an environment that is supposed to be completely frozen solid and sterile. The mystery only grew deeper because the dry valleys are one of the most extreme environments on Earth. It is a polar desert, where it virtually never rains. Temperatures drop to mind-numbing lows, and the ice should be completely static. Yet, like clockwork, this terrifying red torrent kept pulsing out from the snout of the glacier. It took modern ice-penetrating technology to finally crack the code and solve the mystery of blood falls once and for all. A team of geophysicists used an advanced radio echo-sounding radar system, essentially flying a massive electromagnetic sensor via helicopter over the glacier to scan deep beneath the ice without ever having to drill a hole. The radar waves punched straight through the solid glacier, mapping the hidden geology below. What they uncovered was a massive, pitch-black subterranean reservoir trapped beneath 400 meters of solid ice, buried directly under the Taylor Glacier for over 2 million years. The data revealed that this trapped subglacial reservoir is an ancient lake formed when an ocean inlet was sealed off as the ice sheet expanded millions of years ago. Trapped in total darkness with no connection to the atmosphere, the water became hypersaline, containing nearly 3 times the salt content of normal ocean water. Because high salt content significantly lowers the freezing point of water, this ancient lake remains completely liquid at sub-zero temperatures, churning beneath hundreds of feet of crushing ice. As the massive glacier moves, its immense weight squeezes down on this subterranean reservoir like a giant hydraulic press. This crushing pressure forces the trapped iron-dense salt water upward through an intricate network of microfractures in the ice sheet. For years at a time, this liquid travels through a subterranean plumbing system, completely isolated from sunlight and oxygen. The moment the pressurized brine finally breaches the surface and explodes out of the snout of Taylor Glacier, it meets atmospheric oxygen for the very first time in over 2 million years. The chemical reaction is instantaneous and dramatic. The dissolved iron reacts with the air, oxidizing on the spot. In plain terms, the clear subterranean brine rusts instantly as it hits the daylight, turning into a thick, bleeding wave of liquid rust. Solving the physical mystery of the blood-red waterfall put an end to a century of wild speculation, but it opened up a far more unsettling question. How could anything possibly exist inside a dark, salty, iron-rich crypt sealed beneath a glacier for millions of years? The real shocker wasn't the color. It was the impossible ecosystem hiding inside the glacier. Life in the subglacial crypt. When researchers finally pinpointed that Blood Falls was powered by an ancient iron-drenched reservoir buried beneath Taylor Glacier, they assumed they were looking at a dead chemical anomaly. Chemistry could explain the rust, and physics could explain why the water remained liquid below freezing. But for astrobiologists and microbiologists, the mystery was far from solved. The core question shifted from a matter of geology to a seemingly impossible biological dilemma. Could anything actually be alive inside a subglacial trap that had been completely isolated from the rest of the planet for over 2 million years? Every fundamental rule of biology suggested the answer should be an absolute no. To sustain life as we know it, organisms require sunlight for photosynthesis or a steady intake of organic material. The subglacial lake beneath Taylor Glacier had neither. It was locked in total, impenetrable darkness, squeezed under hundreds of meters of solid ice, completely devoid of oxygen, and poisoned with toxic levels of iron and sulfur. It was an environment so toxic, cold, and isolated that scientists treated it as a terrestrial model for a completely dead world. Then, microbiologists extracted untouched brine samples directly from the liquid pulsing out of the glacier, sequenced the DNA trapped inside, and uncovered a biological shocker that completely redefined how we define the boundaries of life. The subterranean lake wasn't a dead chemical vault. It was a thriving, self-sustaining, microscopic alien ecosystem. Scientists discovered 17 distinct types of extremophile bacteria living inside the pitch-black brine. These organisms weren't just surviving, they had evolved a completely alien metabolic pathway that had never been seen anywhere else on Earth. Lacking sunlight to photosynthesize and oxygen to breathe, these subglacial microbes had learned to literally breathe iron and feed on ancient sulfates trapped in the sediment. Instead of relying on the sun, the bacteria use a complex chemical cascade. They harvest energy by reducing sulfate to sulfite, and then use the abundant dissolved iron to oxidize that sulfite back into sulfate, recycling their own limited chemical resources in a closed, perpetual loop. They are living off the literal decay of the rocks beneath them, using the iron as an electron acceptor in place of oxygen. They created an isolated food web beneath a frozen glacier that operates completely independent of the sun, the atmosphere, or the rest of the biosphere on Earth's surface. Solving the biological mystery of Blood Falls didn't just teach us about Antarctica. It blew the doors wide open for the search for extraterrestrial life across the solar system. For decades, space agencies assumed that searching for life on other worlds meant searching for planets with sunny surfaces, liquid surface oceans, and oxygen-rich atmospheres. The discovery of a thriving subglacial crypt beneath Taylor Glacier completely flipped that script. It proved that complex, living ecosystems can adapt, survive, and thrive inside dark, oxygen-free, hypersaline ocean pockets locked beneath miles of solid surface ice. Immediately, oceanographers and astrobiologists realized that Blood Falls was a direct Earth proxy for frozen worlds like Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus. Both of these moons are encased in miles of brittle ice shells, but harbor massive, warm, hypersaline oceans underneath, kept liquid by tidal forces. If life could evolve an iron-breathing metabolic loop inside a dark Antarctic reservoir on Earth, there is zero reason to believe similar extremophile microorganisms aren't thriving right now in the subterranean oceans of Europa or Enceladus. Scientists solved the mystery of the bleeding glacier, proving that even in Earth's most desolate polar graveyard, life finds a way to construct an immortal subterranean kingdom. If bleeding glaciers sound wild, imagine an ocean hole the size of Switzerland opening up in the dead of winter, the phantom hole in the ice. Just when scientists thought they had mapped every terrifying quirk of Antarctica's surface and subglacial world, the satellite era arrived and revealed a phenomenon so massive and bizarre, it looked like a literal glitch in reality. In 1974, early meteorological satellites orbiting over the Southern Ocean beamed back images of the Lazarev Sea, located off the coast of Queen Maud Land. Nestled right in the middle of a continuous frozen sheet of sea ice in the dead of Antarctic winter, researchers spotted something impossible, a gigantic gaping hole of open liquid ocean water. This wasn't a minor crack or a temporary breach. It was a massive abyss of open ocean spanning over 120,000 square miles, roughly the size of Switzerland or the state of Maine. In polar science, a hole in the sea ice surrounded entirely by open water is known as a polynya. Coastal polynyas happen all the time near the shore, driven by powerful offshore winds blowing new ice away from the coast. But this hole, dubbed the Maud-Rise polynya, was hundreds of miles out in the deep open sea, far away from any coastline. There were no land winds to push the ice away. It was a massive, inexplicable void torn into the middle of a frozen ocean, where temperatures were hovering at -30 degrees Fahrenheit. For 3 consecutive winters, 1974, 1975, and 1976, the phantom hole stayed open, defying every known thermodynamic law of polar oceanography. And then, as abruptly as it appeared, it vanished. The sea ice refroze solid, and the hole disappeared into the dark. For 4 decades, the Maud-Rise polynya became one of polar science's most frustrating cold cases. Was it a one-time atmospheric fluke? A satellite calibration error? Then, in the dead of winter in 2016 and 2017, the phantom hole suddenly reopened. Satellites captured the ice sheet cracking apart again, revealing a massive black void of open water pulsing in the middle of the White Ocean, this time expanding to roughly 30,000 square miles. The mystery had returned with a vengeance, and this time scientists were armed with modern technology to figure out what kind of violent, hidden engine was burning a hole through miles of sea ice from beneath. Solving this mystery was critical because a hole that size acts like a giant open chimney in the sea ice. Normally, the white ice acts as a thermal blanket, keeping ocean heat locked underground and reflecting solar radiation. A massive opening allows colossal amounts of heat and moisture to escape from the ocean directly into the frigid polar atmosphere, triggering massive storm systems and altering ocean circulation patterns across the entire southern hemisphere. Early theories blamed simple surface winds or sudden atmospheric warming spikes, but atmospheric models quickly disproved those ideas. The air above the ice was brutally cold, more than cold enough to freeze seawater in minutes. Something far more powerful and insidious had to be happening miles deep down on the ocean floor, actively melting the heavy ice sheet from below like a giant blowtorch. Researchers realized that whatever was powering the Maud-Rise polynya wasn't coming from the sky. It was rising up from the pitch-black depths of the Southern Ocean, driven by a complex, hidden circulatory loop that scientists were only just beginning to understand. To solve a hole this big, scientists had to recruit an army of deep-diving SEALs, Ocean Machine Unleashed. To crack open the mystery of the Maud-Rise polynya, scientists faced a major logistics nightmare. How do you collect real-time ocean data from the middle of a violent, ice-choked void during the pitch-black Antarctic winter? Ships couldn't breach the heavy pack ice safely, and satellite imagery only showed the surface outline. The real action was happening deep down in the water column. So researchers turned to an ingenious, unlikely ally: Southern elephant seals. Equipped with small, non-invasive satellite transmitters glued to their heads, these heavy diving mammals plunged thousands of feet beneath the ice, acting as mobile oceanographic sensors. As the seals swam through the freezing depths, their tags continuously recorded water temperature, salinity levels, and depth data, beaming the information back to satellites whenever they surfaced inside the open hole. Combined with autonomous underwater floats and high-resolution climate modeling, the SEAL data finally solved the mystery behind the Swiss-sized abyss. The culprit was a terrifyingly efficient hydrodynamic convergence known as Ekman transport, combined with unique underwater geography. Sitting deep on the seafloor beneath the region is a massive submerged mountain known as Maud-Rise. When powerful polar windstorms swirl across the surface ice, they drag the top layer of ocean water along with them. Due to Earth's rotation, this water shifts at a 90-degree angle, driving an intense ocean current straight over the peak of the underwater mountain. As this fast-moving current hits the steep slopes of Maud Rise, it creates a massive, swirling underwater vortex. Essentially, a giant, churning whirlpool that reaches deep down into the ocean. This deep-water vortex acts as a giant elevator pump. Deep below the Antarctic surface lies a layer of dense, extremely warm, hypersaline ocean water that has drifted down from the equator over hundreds of years. Normally, a thick blanket of fresh, cold surface water sits on top, keeping that deep, warm water trapped and prevented from reaching the surface. But when the wind-driven ocean vortex over Maud Rise picks up speed, it rips that layering apart. The violent turbulence pulls the dense, warm salt water up from thousands of feet down and thrusts it straight toward the surface. When that subterranean ocean warmth hits the underside of the sea ice, it melts the ice instantly from below, burning a massive, permanent hole straight through the ice sheet, regardless of how cold the air is above. Solving the mechanics of the Maud Rise hole was a massive victory for physical oceanography. But what researchers learned next is what makes the discovery so alarming. As the warm, deep water melts the ice from below, it mixes with fresh meltwater and becomes extremely salty as it refreezes along the edges. This dense, salty water sinks back down to the ocean floor, driving the global thermohaline circulation, the giant ocean conveyor belt that regulates global climate and weather systems worldwide. The opening of the polynya acts as an enormous release valve, venting massive amounts of heat directly from the ocean interior into the polar sky. If ocean currents continue to shift and winds intensify, these phantom holes will appear more frequently, accelerating ice sheet loss and disrupting ocean circulation networks that stabilize global temperatures. Scientists proved that the giant hole in the ice isn't a random fluke. It is a sign that the deep ocean engine beneath Antarctica is waking up, churning warm water upward, and fundamentally rewriting the rules of global climate stability. Unsolved vault beneath the ice. Solving the secrets of Cretaceous forests, bleeding glaciers, and phantom ocean holes solved huge chapters of polar science. But make no mistake, Antarctica is still holding on to its absolute creepiest, most dangerous secrets. For every anomaly researchers manage to crack open, the ice sheet reveals a dozen new puzzles that defy modern physics, geology, and biology. We aren't looking at a continent where the mysteries are wrapped up. We are looking at a giant frozen vault that scientists have barely begun to scratch. Take Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano on Earth, sitting right on Ross Island. Deep inside its summit crater lies an anomaly that shouldn't exist. A permanent, bubbling lava lake holding liquid magma at nearly 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, completely surrounded by thousands of feet of ice. How a continuous conduit of molten rock stays superheated for decades inside a polar deep freeze without either flash cooling into solid stone or melting the surrounding glacier into an apocalyptic mega-flood remains an open, unsolved thermodynamic mystery. Even stranger, when Erebus belies mild volcanic burps, it ejects plumes of gas laced with microscopic crystalline specks of pure gold, spewing nearly 100 grams of gold dust into the atmosphere every single day. Then there are the phantom subglacial lakes hidden thousands of feet beneath the ice sheet. Satellite altimetry scans have mapped well over 400 isolated subglacial lakes across the continent, including Lake Vostok, a subterranean monster the size of Lake Ontario, buried under 2.5 miles of solid ice. But satellite tracking revealed an unsettling, erratic dynamic. These hidden lakes aren't static. They fill up and blow their banks in massive subterranean flash floods, flushing millions of gallons of pressurized water through interconnected river networks carved into the bedrock under the ice sheet. Scientists can track these subterranean surges because the solid ice above literally rises and falls like a giant chest breathing. But we still have zero idea what triggers these sudden, massive subterranean flushing cycles. Is it geothermal heat spikes from undiscovered volcanic networks, hydraulic pressure limits, or something far more unstable? Even deeper beneath East Antarctica sits the Wilkes Land gravity anomaly, a colossal, dense mass buried beneath a massive ice impact crater over 250 miles wide. It is more than double the size of the asteroid impact crater that wiped out the dinosaurs. Geophysicists are still fiercely debating what is actually down there. Is it the buried, metallic corpse of an ancient space rock that nearly shattered the planet 250 million years ago? Or a massive plume of mantle rock rising from the deep Earth? The reality is simple. Antarctica isn't a dead museum of past secrets. It is a locked laboratory of actively unraveling anomalies, where thousands of feet of ice are still hiding geologic and biological forces capable of rewriting what we know about our planet. So, what does all of this mean for the future of our world as the frozen vault slowly cracks open? Antarctica was never a dead, barren wasteland frozen in static silence. It is a dynamic, highly volatile planet shaper that is rapidly waking up. From the lush Cretaceous rainforests buried in the soil to the iron-breathing microbes thriving in subglacial crypts, and the massive ocean engines tearing holes through the winter ice. Cracking these mysteries has completely rewritten our understanding of Earth's past, present, and future. The ice holds the blueprints to global climate shifts, extraterrestrial life, and oceanic feedback loops that directly govern the world we live in today. As the polar vault continues to unlock its secrets, one thing is abundantly clear. What happens at the bottom of the world eventually impacts every single corner of the globe. Hit that subscribe button right now to stay tuned for our next upload.